James Carter never suspected that the woman he loved, Emily, was hiding a secret that could destroy everything. For months, subtle lies and whispered phone calls had gone unnoticed, until one bright afternoon, he caught her in broad daylight with a man named Victor. What began as a perfect life spiraled into betrayal, fear, and shocking twists that no one could have predicted. How far would Emily go to keep her secret? And what would James do when the truth finally came crashing down? James Carter's life looked perfect from the outside. A beautiful home in a quiet suburban neighborhood, a flourishing career as an architect, and a wife who seemed devoted in every way. Friends and neighbors often admired the Carters, calling them the ideal couple. On Sundays the house would smell of fresh coffee and baked pastries. James would mow the lawn in crisp silence while Emily tended the garden, humming softly. To anyone watching, it was a picture of happiness, smooth, polished, and unshakable. But James began noticing little cracks in that perfection, subtle signs that something was off. Emily's laughter sometimes felt forced, lingering just a second too long before she forced a smile. Her phone, always buzzing with notifications, had recently taken on a life of its own. She would leave the room abruptly, pockets stuffed with excuses about errands or phone calls, and return minutes later with a casual air that barely hid the tension. James told himself it was stress, that maybe his imagination was running wild, yet the quiet unease in the pit of his stomach refused to go away. Mark, James's best friend since college, had been more blunt. He often dropped hints during their late-night drinks or casual catch-ups. "Have you noticed Emily lately?" Mark would ask, voice low, as if speaking too loudly might summon some hidden truth. "She's different. Distracted, secretive." James, protective of his marriage, dismissed these observations at first. He trusted Emily completely. She had been his partner for 7 years, and he refused to believe that the life he had painstakingly built could harbor shadows he couldn't see. Even as James clung to his trust, little moments started piercing through the veil of normalcy. One morning, he noticed a coffee stain on the counter, not from him, not from Emily's routine cup, and a folded napkin with a hastily scribbled note that simply said, "Meet me soon." His heart raced, a cold knot forming in his chest. He shoved it into his pocket, convincing himself it must have been a mistake, a leftover scrap from someone else's day, yet the sense of unease lingered, growing heavier with each passing hour. Emily's behavior began to shift in ways he couldn't explain. She suddenly spent hours on errands, sometimes returning with excuses that didn't quite match the time she had been gone. At dinner, she would glance at her phone, her eyes darting to the screen before James could even ask. The small, invisible walls she built around herself were almost imperceptible, but James felt them, like a faint draft that kept him awake at night. Then there were the nights when she came home later than usual, brushing off his questions with a soft laugh that barely masked nervousness. James began watching from the window, the same way a detective might observe a suspect, though he refused to call it that. He wanted proof, clarity, and above all, a reason to believe that everything was still as it seemed. Mark's warnings echoed in his mind, mixing with the growing suspicion that perhaps James had been blind all along. The more James tried to rationalize, the more uneasy he felt. It was the small details, the way Emily's perfume seemed unfamiliar, the quick, hushed phone calls she ended abruptly, the way her eyes flickered towards something invisible, that gnawed at him. Something was hidden, lurking beneath the surface of their perfect life, something dangerous enough to shatter the calm world he had built. James felt both fear and curiosity in equal measure. He couldn't stop himself from noticing, from wondering who she might be meeting, what secrets she was keeping. Each moment of silence, each glance from Emily, became a puzzle piece he didn't yet understand. A part of him wanted to confront her immediately, to tear the veil away and face whatever truth lay beneath. Another part, equally strong, feared what he might find. He didn't yet know that his life, so carefully arranged, was about to unravel in ways he could never imagine. The perfect image he held on to so tightly was fragile, and the storm waiting just beyond the edges of that sunny suburban life was ready to strike quietly, swiftly, and without warning. James could no longer ignore the gnawing suspicion that had taken root in his mind. The small inconsistencies in Emily's behavior, once easy to dismiss, now formed a pattern he could not overlook. Every late return home, every whispered phone call, every sudden trip that lasted hours felt like pieces of a puzzle he was desperate yet afraid to solve. He began to observe her more closely, not in anger but in a quiet, careful way, as though watching from a distance would reveal truths hidden in plain sight. One afternoon, Mark mentioned seeing Emily at a cafe downtown. James froze mid-sip of his coffee, heart skipping a beat. "She was with a man," Mark said, his voice hesitant. "I didn't know him, but, James, they weren't just talking." That simple statement twisted in James's chest. He wanted to argue, to tell himself Mark had been mistaken, that it was nothing, but deep down, he knew something had changed. James began to notice the subtle signs more acutely. Emily's phone was never far from her hand, but she had grown more secretive with it, often stepping into another room or leaving it behind entirely. There were text messages he glimpsed only by accident, fleeting glimpses of words like "soon" or "can't wait," never enough to provide clarity, but enough to make his mind race. A sense of betrayal, like a shadow, lingered over their home. He had never imagined that trust could be so fragile, that the woman he loved might harbor a secret dangerous enough to shatter everything. Then came the first hint of a name, Victor. James had never met him, yet the mention of Victor began to surface in unexpected ways. Emily seemed to mention him casually in passing, her tone light, but there was something in the way she smiled, something James could not place. He noticed a pattern of secrecy, a ritual in her movements, that led him to wonder how long this had been going on. Every glance at her phone, every sudden pause in conversation, became a clue pointing toward a truth James was not ready to face. The tension in the house grew unbearable. James tried to maintain normalcy, speaking politely, sharing meals, laughing at jokes, all while his mind spun with suspicion. He found himself walking past the windows, pretending to check the garden while really watching for any sign of unusual visitors. Sometimes he imagined seeing Victor lurking nearby, waiting for Emily. Other times he felt a pang of guilt, wondering if his imagination had turned ordinary moments into dangerous fantasies. Emily's behavior shifted in subtle, alarming ways. She started leaving the house at odd hours, claiming errands or appointments that did not exist. Her laughter sometimes had a hollow ring, too quick to disappear, leaving a lingering tension in the air. James began to notice the little details he had overlooked before. The way she adjusted her necklace when speaking on the phone, the way her eyes flickered with a mixture of excitement and fear, the nervous tapping of her fingers when she thought no one was watching. Mark continued to drop hints, though cautiously, never wanting to betray James's trust. "There's something off," he warned one evening, leaning closer over the dinner table. "I can't put my finger on it, but I think you should watch carefully. Trust your instincts." James nodded, masking the growing dread that twisted his stomach into knots. He wanted to confront Emily, to demand answers, yet a part of him feared what he might uncover. The unknown had a dangerous pull, like standing at the edge of a cliff, both terrifying and impossible to resist. It was during one of these quiet, watchful evenings that James first glimpsed Victor in person. Through the window of a nearby cafe, he saw Emily sitting across from a man with sharp features and a confident air. They laughed together, leaning close, oblivious to the world around them. James's chest tightened. The perfect life he had built, the safe world he had trusted, now felt fragile, ready to shatter under the weight of hidden truths. Suspicion had turned into certainty. Emily was hiding something. James could feel it in every glance, every movement, every carefully constructed lie. The question now was not whether she was unfaithful, but what lengths she would go to keep the secret. And James, caught between fear and curiosity, knew that uncovering the truth would change everything, forever. It was a bright, unassuming afternoon when James's life began to fracture in ways he could never have imagined. The sun shone brilliantly, casting golden light across the suburban streets, making everything look peaceful and perfect. Too perfect. James had decided to leave work early, a small surprise for Emily, a gesture of love that now seemed tragically ironic. He parked in the driveway, the familiar sound of the car engine echoing in his own ears, and felt a strange tension prickling at the edges of his mind. Something told him that today would be different, though he couldn't explain why. As he approached the front of the house, James noticed the neighbor's gate had been left open, swaying slightly in the warm breeze. A small detail, seemingly harmless, but it triggered a flicker of unease. James's footsteps slowed instinctively, the air around him suddenly charged with the quiet tension of anticipation. Something was off. The hum of the street, the chirping of birds, the laughter of children playing nearby, all seemed incongruously cheerful, a stark contrast to the storm gathering in his chest. James moved closer to the window, the curtain brushing lightly against his fingertips. He glanced through the glass, half hoping to see nothing unusual, half bracing for a revelation that might destroy the life he had always believed was secure. And then he saw her. Emily. His Emily. She wasn't alone. The sight stopped James cold. She was sitting at the edge of the porch, laughing, leaning in close to a man James had never met before. The stranger, Victor, as he had come to know in whispered rumors and fragmented glimpses, held her hand in a way that made James's stomach twist. The intimacy, the familiarity, the ease with which they interacted was devastating. This wasn't a fleeting glance, a casual conversation, it was a private world James had no place in, a betrayal laid bare under the sun, without the veil of darkness to hide it. Time seemed to slow. James's mind raced, a torrent of disbelief, confusion, and heartbreak threatening to overwhelm him. Every memory of Emily's smiles, the warmth of their shared mornings, the laughter echoing through the halls of their home, every single moment now felt tainted, a carefully constructed illusion. He could almost hear the echo of Mark's warnings in his ears, each one now unbearably true. He watched as Victor brushed Emily's hair behind her ear, a simple gesture that now felt like a knife twisting in James's chest. Emily laughed at something Victor said, a light, carefree sound that James had thought was reserved only for him. The sunlight reflected off her hair, off the porcelain skin he had kissed so many times, making the scene almost surreal, as if reality itself were cruelly mocking him. James's hands trembled, gripping the windowsill as he tried to steady his racing heart. His mind struggled to comprehend what he was seeing. Months of subtle signs, quiet suspicions, and growing anxiety had led to this singular, devastating moment. The betrayal was no longer a vague fear, no longer a shadow lurking in the corners of his mind. It was tangible, undeniable, and unrelentingly painful. He wanted to rush inside, confront them, demand answers, but a strange, frozen clarity held him back. The scene before him seemed both intimate and fragile, as if any sudden movement would shatter it completely. The sunlight glinted off the table where they sat, illuminating the laughter, the secret touches, the stolen world that James had only just discovered. And in that frozen, suspended moment, he realized the terrifying truth. Emily's secret life was no longer hidden, and nothing would ever be the same again. James took a deep breath, forcing himself to step back from the window. He had witnessed the betrayal firsthand, truth that would haunt him endlessly. The perfect life he had believed in, the marriage he had trusted completely, had been an illusion. The shock burned through him, leaving behind an emptiness, a fear, and a determination to uncover just how far this deception had gone. The sun continued to shine, casting bright light over the scene that had torn his world apart. James knew that the days ahead would be filled with painful truths, dangerous choices, and a confrontation he could no longer avoid. But in that moment, frozen in disbelief, he realized that life, as he had known it, had ended right there, in broad daylight. After that harrowing afternoon, James felt a storm brewing inside him, a mix of anger, betrayal, and an unrelenting need for answers. He could no longer live in uncertainty, unable to trust the woman he had loved for years. The image of Emily and Victor, laughing together on the porch in broad daylight, haunted him relentlessly. Every detail, the tilt of her head, the sparkle in her eyes, the way their hands brushed against each other, played in his mind like a cruel repeating loop. He knew confrontation would be dangerous, impulsive, and likely destructive. Instead, he chose observation. He would uncover the truth carefully, silently, piece by piece. Every lie had a pattern, every secret had a trail, and James, meticulous and determined, decided to follow it. That evening, he left the house under the pretense of a late-night work project. His heart thumped in a rhythm of tension and dread, but he was resolute. He had to know everything. For days, James became a shadow. He followed Emily discreetly, maintaining distance but never losing sight of her. He watched as she moved through her secret world with precision, meeting Victor in cafes, quiet parks, and even the parking lot of a shopping mall. Each encounter was brief but intense, filled with glances and gestures that were unmistakably intimate. The reality he had denied for so long now confronted him relentlessly. The deeper James delved, the more he realized how carefully Emily had planned everything. She knew the neighborhoods, streets, and the habits of those around her. Every meeting seemed calculated to avoid attention, yet somehow her heart betrayed her in small telltale ways. The way her eyes lit up when Victor arrived, the nervous brushing of her hair, the subtle trembling in her hands. James recorded it all in his mind, each detail building a picture of deception he could no longer ignore. It was during one such observation that James discovered something far more disturbing than mere infidelity. Emily was not only seeing Victor, she was planning something larger, something that suggested a complete break from the life she had shared with James. She spoke in hushed tones, often using phrases like "soon" and "we can't wait," hints of a future he could not yet fully comprehend. James felt a chill run down his spine. This was no fleeting affair, it was carefully orchestrated, dangerous in its clarity and commitment. One evening, James followed Emily to a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town. He watched as she met Victor in a secluded driveway, their movements furtive, almost conspiratorial. They spoke quickly, checking their surroundings as if they expected someone to discover them at any moment. James's heart raced, not just from the betrayal, but from the realization that Emily's deception had escalated far beyond what he had imagined. The stakes were higher, the danger more immediate, and he felt a mixture of fear and determination settle over him. The more James observed, the more his understanding deepened. Every hidden smile, every stolen moment, revealed the lengths Emily would go to keep her secret. Yet, despite the mounting evidence, a part of him hesitated. He wondered if the confrontation he had been avoiding might eventually spiral into something uncontrollable, something that could destroy not just his marriage, but his sense of safety, his very life. Still, James pressed on. Night after night, he documented, memorized, and followed, each revelation adding to the weight of his knowledge. The man he had trusted most, his wife, was leading a double life, and he was powerless to stop it from unfolding before his eyes. The tension became unbearable, a quiet but constant pressure in his chest, as he realized that knowing the truth might be the only way to regain control. By the end of the week, James had enough evidence to confront Emily, but he also knew he had to choose the right moment, the right way, or risk everything unraveling. Each step he took, each glance through a window, each whispered observation, brought him closer to the inevitable. The quiet suburban streets that had once felt safe now seemed like a stage for a drama of betrayal, danger, and heartbreak. And James, determined and broken-hearted, was ready to face the truth, no matter the cost. James had spent days following Emily, documenting every meeting, memorizing every detail, and preparing himself for the confrontation he knew was inevitable. But nothing could have prepared him for what happened that fateful afternoon. He had decided to arrive home earlier than usual, planning to witness, quietly and cautiously, Emily's next secret meeting with Victor. The sun was high in the sky, warm and deceptively cheerful, while James felt a cold dread coil tightly in his chest. As he turned the corner toward his street, he saw Emily running toward a parked car, her phone pressed to her ear, her steps urgent. But it wasn't Victor standing there waiting for her. Instead, James noticed a small crowd forming at the edge of the driveway, people pointing, their voices sharp with panic. Then he saw him, Victor, lying sprawled across the pavement, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. The car he had been rushing to get into was dented and mangled, evidence of a sudden accident. Emily's face, usually so composed and calculating, was a mask of pure terror. She crouched beside Victor, her hands shaking as she tried to assess the damage, muttering inaudible words, as if pleading for him to respond. The intensity of her panic was startling, the rawness of her fear stripping away the carefully crafted facade she had maintained for months. James felt a strange mix of shock and disbelief. Victor, the man who had caused the silent fracture in his marriage, was now vulnerable, and the woman he had loved was entirely unprepared to deal with reality. James watched silently from behind a hedge, heart pounding, mind racing. Every instinct screamed at him to intervene, confront Emily, to demand answers. But he held back, compelled by the unexpected vulnerability of the situation. Victor's presence, once threatening and infuriating, now seemed fragile and human, a stark contrast to the confident, untouchable figure he had imagined. Emily's frantic movements betrayed desperation and fear. She tried to lift Victor, checked his pulse, and made hurried phone calls, her voice quivering, words spilling in a frantic rush. The sight of her panic struck James with an unexpected clarity. Betrayal and love were tangled in a dangerous, unpredictable web. The woman he thought he knew so well was terrified, not for herself, but for the man she had been secretly seeing. And in that terror, James glimpsed a truth that was far more complex than simple infidelity. The accident forced James to confront a moral dilemma he had never anticipated. He could expose the affair, confront Emily, and demand explanations. Or he could intervene, help Victor, and watch the consequences of months of deception unfold naturally. The choice weighed heavily on him. His hands shook as he realized that the truth he had been chasing had now collided with reality in a way that left no room for pretense, no easy path forward. As Emily struggled to stabilize Victor, James's mind replayed all the signs he had ignored, all the moments he had dismissed as imagination or paranoia. Each meeting, each stolen glance, each secretive action had led to this moment. The thrill and danger of the affair had brought them to the edge of disaster, and James now saw that consequences were unavoidable. Then, as if sensing someone watching, Emily looked up, her eyes scanning the hedge where James hid. For a fleeting second, their gazes met, and he saw in her expression a mixture of guilt, fear, and a silent plea. That brief connection, unspoken but powerful, reminded him that betrayal was never simple, never one-dimensional. It involved choices, mistakes, and consequences that rippled far beyond the initial act. James stepped back, hiding in the shadows, and let the chaos unfold. Emily continued to tend to Victor, panicked yet precise, while James realized that the truth he had sought for weeks had finally revealed itself, not in stolen kisses or secret meetings, but in the raw, terrifying reality of human vulnerability. Betrayal had consequences, and for the first time, James understood that uncovering the affair meant confronting not only Emily and Victor, but the fragile, unpredictable nature of trust, love, and the choices that bind them together. By the time the ambulance arrived, James knew nothing would ever be the same. The perfect life he had envisioned was shattered, replaced by a reality both shocking and unavoidable. And in that quiet, tense moment, he realized the story of deception had taken a turn no one could have predicted, a twist that would haunt him, Emily, and Victor forever. The ambulance sirens faded into the distance, leaving a deafening silence over the driveway where James had witnessed the accident. Emily sat on the curb, hands trembling, her face pale, streaked with sweat and dirt. Victor was being loaded into the ambulance, moaning softly, his confident demeanor shattered by the accident. James remained hidden, watching, torn between fury, heartbreak, and an unexpected sense of moral responsibility. The perfect life he had thought he possessed lay in ruins, Yet the final confrontation had not arrived in the way he had imagined. As the paramedics rushed Victor away, Emily's eyes met James's across the street. For a moment, the tension between them was tangible, electric, and suffocating. In her gaze, James saw a storm of emotions: guilt, fear, desperation, and something more complex, almost like regret. The woman who had betrayed him was now exposed in a way that stripped away all pretenses. James felt a cold clarity settle over him. The affair was no longer just a secret to uncover. It was a reality he had to navigate carefully, or risk losing everything entirely. He stepped closer, his mind racing. Emily's carefully constructed world was crumbling, and for the first time, she seemed vulnerable in a way he had never witnessed. Her phone slipped from her hand, clattering against the concrete, and she stared at it as if it held the power to erase the truth. James knew that whatever happened next would define not only their marriage, but the very nature of their lives going forward. Emily finally spoke, her voice trembling, pleading without words that he could hear. She gestured helplessly toward the ambulance, toward the chaos she had helped create, as though begging James to understand, to forgive, to choose a path that spared her the consequences of her deception. But James's mind was a whirlwind of calculated thought and raw emotion. He had spent weeks observing, piecing together every secret encounter, memorizing every detail of her betrayal. Now, faced with the tangible reality of it, he realized that the truth he had long sought came with a weight far heavier than he had imagined. In the days that followed, James made a choice that surprised even himself. He confronted Emily, not with rage, not with violence, but with evidence and questions that demanded honesty. He documented everything he had seen, every meeting, every secret phone call, every stolen moment of intimacy. The confrontation was raw and unfiltered, a long and painful unveiling of months of lies. Emily's defenses crumbled, and in her tears and trembling, she confessed to everything: the affair, the planning, and the reckless secrecy that had led to Victor's accident. Yet, the story did not end in dramatic retribution. Emily left the house, walking away from the life she had built with James, leaving behind her dreams, her comfort, and the illusion of perfection. Victor recovered, physically unharmed, but forever marked by the incident, his arrogance tempered by vulnerability. James, left to process the aftermath, felt a mixture of relief, sorrow, and a strange sense of empowerment. He had survived betrayal, witnessed its consequences, and emerged with a deeper understanding of trust, deception, and the fragility of human relationship. The neighborhood, once filled with the quiet hum of normalcy, now whispered tales of the shocking affair and the dramatic accident that had exposed it. Friends and neighbors speculated, piecing together fragments of a story only James truly understood. The sunny streets, the bright houses, and the well-manicured lawns could no longer hide the scars of deception. The perfect image of suburban life had been irrevocably shattered, a reminder that appearances could be dangerous illusion. James moved forward cautiously, carrying the lessons of betrayal and survival with him. The story of Emily's affair, caught in broad daylight and laid bare by circumstance, became a cautionary tale, a chilling reminder that trust, once broken, is difficult to repair. Even in the brightest sunlight, the shadows of human desire and deceit can emerge, striking without warning, forever changing lives. And as James rebuilt his life, stronger and wiser, he knew one truth above all: the past could not be undone, but the future, though uncertain, was his to reclaim.